Hello, thank you for joining in another episode of SciFi. I'm Amy.
And I'm Sarah.
And today we're interviewing a fantasy author named Jamison Stone about his new epic fantasy novel, The Rune of the Apprentice.
So, hi, Jamison. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, yeah. Thanks for having me. It's really exciting to be here. Thank you.
I guess I'll go ahead and jump in. How is it that you got into sci-fi and fantasy? Like, what are some of your favorite fandoms?
Oh man, that's a great question. So, gosh, when did I start? I probably was introduced through video games. We had a Famicom or a Super Nintendo when I was, really, really young. And so I started playing video games, and then that opened the world up to me to D&D and Vampire the Masquerade and Shadowrun, and a lot of tabletop games. So. I started with video games, and that's always been a really huge kind of influence in my life. But then through more traditional tabletop RPGs, started reading just a bunch of fantasy, and we had stuff like Narnia as well. But I really, really got into the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan, and there's a lot of trappings there, and there's a lot of critiques from fans. But minus some of the failings of that series, I really loved it, and it grew into this obsession, and now we have my own fantasy science fiction novel here with Rune the Apprentice. So obviously it had some pretty deep roots.
So what authors inspired you? What authors were you inspired by?
Yeah, so as Robert Jordan was a huge one. I really enjoy Brandon Sanderson and Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman. So it's The Sandman. I've read probably every single one of his books, including the graphic novels. But the Sandman series is really. Have you guys have had the opportunity to read those?
I'm obsessed with Sandman.
Oh, me too. And they're making a movie now, is my understanding, right? Or at least there's always been kind of like the hope of a movie. I remember reading both The Sandman and then also the Books of Magic, which he wrote, but not all of them. I think only like the first 5. And that was huge for me personally. It just opened me up to this whole other way of thinking. So I have huge, huge, huge respect for them. But also Ursula K. Le Guin, and there's so many others. It's so hard. But if I were to name like top 3, it would definitely be Robert Jordan, Patrick Rothfuss as well, Neil Gaiman. Those would probably be my top 3, and Brandon Sanderson.
So some of the profits from the book are going to help military families. Do you want to tell us a little bit about why you're doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my wife is active duty military. She's a non-commissioned officer, and she plays for the Army Field Band here at Fort Meade in Maryland. And so we live very humbly, so it's not like we're it's like huge, like high brass family. But there's a lot of military families that are really struggling, unfortunately. And so one of the things I think a lot of people aren't really aware of how our military families and a lot of just service members and veterans are doing both when they come home and then after they leave the military. And so early part of the campaign, and there was a really very strong kind of focus around these charities and giving money to these charities. And so we're actually very excited to be able to then donate the money in the coming months once the book is released. I'm actually paid these royalties, so we have the money to give. But it's been a really, really wonderful experience of seeing a lot of the other military families come together around the novel, and not only love of reading and of really cool epic world building, but also bringing some awareness to some of the plights of our military families. So that's why we did it. It's the donations are going to be relatively humble, but it was a nice way to bring attention to, I think, one of many important issues.
And it does seem to really fit in with like the story as well, just because of all the different groups of soldiers. So it just
Totally.
so it seems like a parallel. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. It was really interesting. I have a very close mentor of mine. He's a 2-star admiral. I don't know if his blurb made it into the actual book or if it's just online, but it was really interesting speaking to him about his experience both in the military in a key leadership position, but then also as an admiral, because he's been in charge of an entire boat, a very large medical ship actually. And so because you guys have some familiarity with the novel, you know that Domadrid as a captain. He's an exiled admiral, but getting his experience, my mentor, and then applying that to the actual novel itself is very interesting. I did the same with Beck, who is an army general, or the land equivalent. He's a general, and so talking to these actual, real military generals and leaders, and then trying to kind of impart some of that same wisdom into the story. I don't know how much of it is actually conveyed. I don't know. We'll let the readers judge that, but it's been a fun process.
It seems to be like a lot of other words interjected, like, so there's Beck. I wasn't sure. At first I thought Beck, like the musician, and then there was Nataraja.
Yeah, Nataraja, yeah.
He's a teacher at Naropa?
Yeah, he is. And he actually blurbed the book. I'm pretty sure that we can look. I think that Nataraja's is, I can find it. I don't know if you can see that. I'm looking at it. I'm looking for the blurb right now. We can see what he said. So Nataraja, his namesake is a Hindu god, the dancer. I'm trying to see if I can find Nataraja's blurb.
And then you've got Rudra, like Swami Rudrananda.
Yes, exactly. Yep. And then Asura. And Asura is kind of, I don't know, I got a little, I probably shouldn't have used that name. It kind of just means demon. It's really more of a red herring. Asura is kind of heralded as this huge, big bad guy of the story. But as the series goes on, you find out that it's, I don't know, spoilers, a little bit of a red herring. He's not a great guy, but there's other forces at play. But I think the question that you're asking is like, where are these names coming from? And it seems like there's a Hindu influence, and the answer to that is yes, 100%, absolutely. The actual cosmology of the world, and it's a real shame. I didn't get to get into all of that in this first novel, and I've already kind of gotten in trouble for doing too much world building. So it's probably good I didn't do it in this first novel, but I'll be able to explore it in the later books in the series. Heavily influenced by the Trimurti. So it's this Hindu notion of these three gods, and these three, it's almost more like essences, almost a little like Neil Gaiman style. He has his seven, the seven endless. And so the Trimurti was very important, and Rudra is very much part of that, and Nataraja is almost a lesser part of it. And it's more of a form of interaction of how these characters interact with each other. So I don't know, I can go on and on and on about this stuff. I don't know if that answers your question. If not, keep asking.
There was a question that we had about the world building.
Sure.
Yeah. So. Because the world is really rich and eclectic, and we could see that you were drawing from a lot of different inspirations as far as like mythologies and religions, philosophies. Can you speak more about that, like broader?
Yeah,
idea?
for sure. So one of the as you notice, I really love epic fantasy worlds, and the world to me is like, it's just so important, and I really designed Terra and this planet and the greater cosmology around it, because I also hint at the Akasha and these sky tree ships, and trying to kind of make some hints of things that are outside of Terra as well. All of the elements and all of the peoples and places of Terra are intimately tied to the Guardians and this whole kind of other cosmological influence. And I wanted it to be relevant to people. I mean, we have primarily, although I don't self-identify as a Christian, in our country, we have a very heavy Christian influence of angels and God and the devil and all that stuff. And so I want to try and take some of the cooler, in my opinion, my subjective opinion, some of the cooler aspects of that. So that this notion of an angel, what is an angel? And so we have the Guardians, and we have Mindra and Mindra's Haven, and he's this Archai. So I try to take some of the more interesting aspects of that, but then also mix it with some of the wonderful aspects in other cultures and customs. So I self-identify as a Buddhist, so I'm a practicing Buddhist, and so there's this whole very interesting cosmology around Buddhism. Now, I actually don't personally self-subscribe to the religious aspects of Buddhism. I'm more of a practice-oriented Zen Buddhist, so it means I just sit on the floor a lot, contemplate my navel. So, but it doesn't mean that I'm not inspired by those cosmologies. So I don't know if that actually answers your question, but so one of the cool things, so in the hardcover, we have the map. I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see this very clearly. So this whole map is actually based on a sacred geometry. And so when you have the hardcover, you can even go online, you can take a look at it. And the actual like nodes of power and ley lines that operate on this planet are intimately connected with these angelic deities, the guardians, the archai, and then also their kind of countermeasure, which are the dark ones too. And that's we get into that a little bit more in book 2 because we have an escalation of information, I guess.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah, very cool.
I think so. Some people have said there's been a little too much world building, so I don't know. You really gotta love fantasy worlds to enjoy this novel.
Do you have any plans yet for book 2?
Absolutely, yeah. So because this is the first installment in an epic series, yeah, book 2 is already outlined. I have major key parts of it written, but the story itself, I have up to 6 books already planned out. It's really interesting. I consider this entire series as a prelude to another story that I'd really like to tell, and I'd like to tell in the form of a video game, like kind of like a massive RPG, something like Final Fantasy or Witcher or like Mass Effect, something along those lines. Although we now have Deus Ex, it would be a good example of kind of a little bit more open world, though. Like really, like Final Fantasy meets Witcher would be a good example, and Mass Effect. So I view this whole series as almost a prelude. And it's one of the reasons that the world is so deep, is because it really could support a very, very, very large scale AAA title for a video game.
That's a cool idea.
Yeah.
It's so there's even more to it than just this book or even book 2. It's just kind of like this whole world.
Oh yeah, and so before you mentioned Nataraja. So in the prologue we have, and not to spoil anything, it means the first couple pages, we have Nataraja having an interaction with Asura, and then he interacts with this person at the academy. I don't want to give too much away. And so the whole backstory of that is its own story, and then Beck's backstory, and how Beck and Damodred know each other, and then how Asura took over the central continent and the unification war. That's its own thing, and I have notes on all of it. One of the questions that you asked is, the military family charity piece. So I wrote much of this information, all through college, but then really dove in deep when my wife was away in training, and then also on tour. And so I just had a lot of free time. I would do my day job, and I'd come back, and it was just like my dog and I here at the house. And so I really, instead of kind of like being in the throes of despair and loneliness, want to dive in and really create something meaningful, at least meaningful for myself and those who like this topic. So there's a lot of information there, and I think the key for me is to then disseminate it in a way that's interesting, not just from that meta perspective, but also just in the moment of the main characters kind of walking around, living their lives, and hopefully having fun. Ultimately, not necessarily fun, but fun for the reader, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So it's Rune of the Apprentice is really your breakout novel. What's it been like to watch it gain popularity?
It's been really exciting. It's been honestly pretty terrifying too. It's such an interesting experience having yourself on display. So because I've spent so much time working on this, it's funny going through, and reviews are starting to come in, and the reviews on the majority have been really amazing. So I'm really blessed to have a very positive response. But some people really don't like the book, and that's fine. It's not saying that they should. It's totally normal that they don't. But it's so interesting. I've received. I used to be a professional ghostwriter and speechwriter, and writing in higher academic world too, and so would have my work critiqued heavily. I mean, like sometimes people being very upset with what I worked on. Most of the time, not. I mean, I was able to keep my job, so obviously I was doing something right. But it's so interesting with a work like this. It's just so much more personal. And maybe that's the difference between being a ghostwriter and then having my name attached to something. But the name piece isn't even there. I think there's just such an emotional investment that it just resonates on a different level. So yeah, it's been honestly really challenging. Even though it's been successful, it's I don't know, I never would have thought it would have been like this.
The Lexi's room, it seems like there's a lot going on with that. It's very symbolic. Do you want to speak about the symbolism behind his room?
Sure, absolutely. Not to give anything away. It's always kind of a balance. I think that everyone has within them passion and this desire to impact the world in the ways in which they are impactful. So the ways that they themselves can affect change, we want to affect that change, but we don't always know necessarily what that is. And sometimes our greatest gifts can also be our greatest downfalls. And so there's a bit of that tied in with Alexei. Additionally, for a young man, and I assume it's true with a young woman, although I'm not a young woman, so I don't want to project that on young women, but I assume it's the same. There are ways that we are manipulated as well, particularly in an adolescence. And so when we have this kind of archetype of Alexei, or the hero, or for a young woman's case, the heroine, of being very impactful, or having the potentiality to impact the world greatly, and yet not knowing exactly how to affect that change and how to affect it in a way that is, I don't know, ethical. And so, and seeing the world, and I mean, I look at the world today, and it's just, oh my good God, so I'm like, what's going on? And not knowing, it's like all the decisions are bad, so which decision do you make? And being in that quandary. And that's very much like Alexei's issue. And then how can he stay ethical, and how can he stay true to himself while only given negative outcomes? I don't know. I'm not sure if that 100% answers your question, but
It does a little bit. I noticed that it was, I don't know if, I don't want to say any spoilers, but it seems like it's also connected to certain emotion.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so I try to kind of carry the line between passion and anger, and fear and love, and where that all comes down. For me, so I'm a former martial artist. So martial arts really is an art of destruction. You learn how to destroy people, for better or for worse. Usually it's for worse for the person that you're fighting. I'm also a yoga instructor. So yoga is all about being in balance, and so finding balance, and martial art is all about putting someone out of balance. I then started training in this really interesting thing called partner yoga. And so partner yoga is this really interesting kind of combination of self-balance and then balance with a partner. And it really redefined the way that I looked at martial arts, that martial arts is a way of unbalancing your opponent, but yoga can be a way of balancing that opponent. And so the rune can be the same way. So you can, when you have an interaction with someone, you can unbalance them, literally or figuratively, or you can put them into balance. And so Alexei, I think all passionate young people and adolescents and adults, they have the ability to either affect their change in the world in a constructive and positive and productive way, or in a destructive and just destructive is the best way to put it, a very angry way. And I think that all of one's actions are tainted for good or for ill based on our own interiority, so how we feel on the inside. So if we are grounded in that, loving, constructive energy, then our outcome is going to be similarly, affected by that. And if we have the inverse, if it's angry and, negative, then we have, that is part of the outcome too. So the rune is kind of a manifestation of that. It just basically turns up the volume on the whole thing. It gives him kind of like almost a very unfair advantage in the world, but it also can be unfair to him, because when he's not pure and if he falls subject to anger, it doesn't go well for anybody.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, good symbolism there.
I try. I don't know if it was communicated well in the book, but did my best. At least for book one.
I did want to ask about, and maybe we already covered it, but do you want to speak about any important themes found in Rune of the Apprentice that you're hoping people will notice?
Yeah, for sure. Let's and I think we definitely touched upon it, but let's try to draw some others. There's a really interesting notion of, and maybe this is pertinent to some of the choices that some of us have, that we may have with our voting for our next president. So in Rune, there is a leader, and his name is Asura, and you learn about him in the first several chapters. He uses power he has created, so God, it's so hard speaking about this without using spoilers. He uses leadership as a tool to affect change in the world, but that change that he affects is not done Ultimately, I'm sure in his mind, he believes that what he's doing is right for the people of Terra. But it's not allowing those people to make their own choices. He believes that he is smarter, more wise, and certainly more powerful, and that he should be choosing for them. And he has, in a way, subjugated the people by playing upon their fears and by playing upon their need for security. To give all self-control over to him. And he's done some wonderful things for select people within his nation, but then also subjugated and disenfranchised many other people across the planet of Terra. And so I think that this is something that we've seen throughout all of history, and whether subjugation of certain races, certain genders, whatever it is, the isolation of power and the use of power to make decisions for others, and to convince other people that they are better off not choosing for themselves, I think is troublesome. And because really it means you don't have to think for yourself. Not only should you not choose for yourself, but you don't have to think for yourself. Let me do the thinking for you. I think that that's really troublesome. I mean, and by troublesome, I mean like horrible. So, yeah. I don't know. Again, this is kind of the meta overlay in Rune and the Apprentice, and probably spans more than just the first book. But these are the things that I think about when writing it and crafting the story and its world and characters.
It seems like, well, when you're making a villainous character, I've heard that it's always really good not to make them like two-dimensional, just kind of like
Sure.
that mustache twirling bad guy. So the fact that believes that he's doing the right thing kind of gives him added dimensions, makes him just more of a well-rounded character, because you see the characters like I want to look at Game of Thrones here, and for some reason Cersei comes to mind.
Sure.
Which I assume in her own mind, in some ways she must think that she's doing the right thing for her family when she
Right.
family. So I think it kind of like, villainous characters that are, three-dimensional, or even sometimes in some ways sympathetic, or like the most interesting.
It's really interesting that you mentioned Cersei. I was actually just thinking about this last night. So Cersei is a really interesting character. So she even mentions when speaking to her brother / lover that their daughter was so pure, and that if something so pure if she could make something that pure, that wonderful, then it must mean that her, Cersei, is not such a monster. And so that shows a lot of reflection and self-understanding, and that she would consider herself to be a monster. And she's done some pretty monstrous things. But the fact that she is, self-cognizant of that is really amazing as a character. Now, obviously, this is all within the mind of, George R. R. Martin. But yeah, I really appreciated that. I was just thinking about that yesterday. It was really very, very fascinating. To tie it back to Rune, Asura, this kind of like monolithic leader and kind of emperor, he's actually one of my favorite characters. He would be like, if I was given like total, like near omnipotent power and had absolutely no like ethical qualms about anything, that's who I would be. If I just had like I'm trying to remember what Genie said in Aladdin, like in the Disney movie Aladdin, like unquestionable power, and not the itty bitty living space as the genie had in the lamp, but that would be me. And so he is so focused on his goal and his outcome of creating what his version of Terra should look like, and more importantly, of in his mind taking the power back from the Archai and the kind of the angels of this world, because he believes that those angels are actually a much worse version of him, or doing exactly everything that I said about making people not think and not choose for themselves. He believes that the angelic guardians of this world are doing that. So he's trying to claim their power for himself and take the power away from them. And so in his mind, he is like totally righteous, totally just, fulfilled in his actions. I don't know. I find it all very interesting. I think that hopefully others do too. Again, you've got to really enjoy these like crazy socio-political interactions to find this stuff interesting. And Yeah. Not everybody does, I guess.
We do.
Excellent.
It was great having you on here, and it was really good to kind of hear your perspective of the book, because it's one thing to read the book, and it's also interesting to hear how the author, perceives their own work.
For sure, right. And I think it's really interesting too, and also what an author hopes to accomplish, and then what they may actually accomplish, and then also what they hope to accomplish maybe for the breadth of a series, and what they only accomplish in one specific book. It's I don't know. Honestly, writing this novel in comparison to a lot of the other works that I've done, it's so hard to fit everything into one volume, particularly in a series, and get all of those concepts squeezed in. And then still also have it be, immediately engaging in the actual, one-on-one interactions. It's a balance, and it's not easy. And I'm certainly getting better as I go. So the key is I'm glad that people are enjoying it, and I hope that they continue to and share it and do all that good stuff.
So you could have easily made it like 800 pages long.
Yeah. I was thinking about that today. I mean, again, I got this is the first hardcover version of this I've seen, and it is only 400 pages. And I was thinking, I was like, I really could have. It's exactly like 400 with 403 pages. That's the end. Easily could have put book 1 and 2 together and made it an 800-page book.
Yeah, it was an enjoyable book, so I recommend people, pick up a copy and read it. So,
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of SciFi. You can pick up Rune of the Apprentice on Amazon, on BarnesandNoble.com, or in bookstores. And if you liked our video, be sure to subscribe to our channel and check out more from us at SciFi.com. That's SciFi.com. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.